Say one more word and I walk away.
Then you and I both know you didn't come here to leave as the same man.
She looked at him and said 7 words. 7 words that a man who had ordered fear for 20 years had never once heard directed at him. She said, "You built a bridge, but who holds you up?" He didn't answer. He couldn't, because in 42 years of living, through poverty, through power, through blood, no one had ever asked him that, and the woman who said it, she was sitting on a plastic milk crate under a highway overpass in the cold with everything she owned stuffed into a green army jacket. Her name was Lisa. His name was James Kwon, and the night he found her was the night his empire finally cracked open, not from the outside, but from within. By the time this story ends, you will understand why a man worth $300 million listened to a woman the world had thrown away, and what it cost him to finally hear the truth. Stay with me.
James Kwon is not a good man. He's not a villain you can dismiss either. He exists in that complicated space most of us pretend doesn't exist, where survival and sin become the same thing. Lisa is not a saint. She's not a symbol. She's a 63-year-old woman who lost everything she built and somehow held on to the one thing that can't be taken, the ability to see people clearly. And Patricia, a name you don't know yet, is the thread that connects them both. A woman who disappeared 6 years ago. A secret that has been sitting, folded inside a Bible, under a highway overpass, waiting for the right moment to surface. 3 questions will carry us through this story. Why did James go looking for a stranger that night? What did Lisa say that broke him? And what was she carrying without knowing it that was about to change everything? The answers are all connected, and none of them are what you expect.
You don't need the full biography to understand James Kwon. You just need 3 moments. The first moment, he is 9 years old. His mother is ironing his school shirt at midnight because it's the only time she has. She doesn't complain. She hums a song he doesn't recognize. He watches her from the doorway on what it would cost. The second moment, he is 23. A man twice his age puts a gun on a table between them and slides an envelope across. James looks at the envelope, looks at the gun, then he picks up the envelope, and that is the moment the world he's in decides it belongs to it. He told himself it was temporary. They always do. The third moment, he is 38. His mother is in a hospital bed. She takes his hand. She looks at him for a long time. She doesn't ask what he does for a living. She already knows. She just says, "James, your father and I didn't cross an ocean for you to become something people are afraid of." He didn't respond. He held her hand until she fell asleep. And 3 years later, when she died, he stood at her grave alone, put 1 white carnation on the headstone, and didn't cry. Not because he didn't feel it, because he had spent so long burying things that even grief had learned to go quiet inside him. That is who James Kwon is as this story begins. A man carrying a promise he failed. A man surrounded by people who need him and no one who loves him. And a man whose empire is about to be pulled apart from the inside by someone he trusted for 12 years. His name was Raymond. Raymond had been James's second in command since the early days. He knew every account, every contact, every name. And for 12 years, James had trusted him the way only a man with no family trusts someone, completely and without backup. That trust had been sold to a federal investigation, piece by piece, for 2 years, while Raymond smiled across every table they shared. James said, "I gave you everything. You had a seat at this table." Raymond said, "I had a seat at your table, James. That's not the same thing." James had dealt with betrayal before. He had a process: identify, eliminate, move forward. But this time, something stopped him, something he couldn't name yet, because for the first time, when he tried to identify the real threat, it pointed somewhere he wasn't ready to look. Lisa had been a nurse for 31 years. She wasn't soft about it. She was the kind of nurse who told you the truth even when the truth was hard, who stayed past her shift not because she had to, but because she couldn't leave a person alone in a moment that mattered. She had a daughter named Carol, a husband she loved, a small house with a garden she tended like it was a living thing. And then her husband's lies surfaced. 8 years of hidden debt.
the kind that takes everything in one season: the house, the savings, the marriage, and eventually, quietly, Carol, who moved away and called less and less until the calls became a kind of polite distance neither of them knew how to close. Lisa didn't collapse. That's the thing about certain kinds of women. The ones who've held dying strangers' hands, who've stayed composed in rooms full of grief. They don't collapse. They just get very, very quiet. She had been under that overpass for 14 months when James found her. She knew every person in that camp by name. She listened to people the way she always had, fully, without judgment, without rushing toward the answer. Some people left that camp. Some disappeared. Some died. And occasionally someone would say something to Lisa, something they needed to say out loud, and she would hold it for them, carefully, like it mattered. 6 years before this story begins, a patient named Patricia had said something to her, something frightened, something specific. Lisa had written it down in the back of her Bible. She didn't understand it then. She prayed for Patricia, and then Patricia was gone, and the world moved on. And Lisa carried that small folded piece of paper the way she carried most things, quietly, without knowing why. She would find out why on the same night James Kwon walked into her light. But that moment is still ahead of us. First, we need to understand what brought him to her.
The federal investigation into James Kwon had been building for 2 years, and James had known about it for most of that time. What he hadn't known was the shape of it. He thought it was financial. He thought it was manageable. He had lawyers. He had distance. He had the kind of careful paper trail that takes years to unravel. What Raymond had given the investigators was not the paper trail. It was the map underneath it, the real structure, the names behind the names. When James finally understood what Raymond had handed over, he sat alone in his office for 4 hours without moving. His phone rang 11 times. He didn't answer because something had cracked. Not his legal strategy, not his business structure, something older than all of it. James, the threat isn't Raymond. The threat is me, what I built, what I let myself become. He left his building at 11:47 that night without calling a driver, without telling security, without a destination. He just walked. And here is something the street will teach you if you spend enough time on it. Where you end up when you have no plan is where part of you has always needed to go. 40 minutes later, he was standing at the edge of a homeless camp under a highway overpass. Orange firelight, the smell of damp concrete, the distant sound of traffic above like something being dragged across a roof. And there she was, Lisa. He almost turned around. The rational part of him, the part that had kept him alive for 20 years, was already calculating. Wrong place, too exposed, no reason to be here. But he didn't turn around, because her eyes, catching the firelight, held something he hadn't seen directed at him in a long time. Not fear, not calculation, not performance. She was just looking at him, the way his mother used to look at him across the kitchen, like she already knew something and was waiting to see if he did too. Lisa, you look lost, son. James, I'm not your son, Lisa. No, but you're somebody's. That's the point. He almost said something sharp. He had 100 sharp things ready at all times. Instead, he felt something move in his chest, a recognition he didn't have a word for, and he crouched down to her eye level. It was the first time he had crouched down in front of a human being since childhood. It cost him something. He felt it leave him, something that had been clenched. James, can you talk to me like a mother would? She studied his face, long enough that most people would have shifted, looked away, gotten uncomfortable. James held it. Lisa, I don't talk to strangers. What's your name? James. I'm James. Lisa, you running from something, James? Or towards something? He thought about it. I honestly don't know anymore. Lisa, all right, that's honest enough. Pull up some ground. And James Kwon, the man 3 federal agencies were building a case around, sat down on cold concrete in the dark, next to a woman with nothing, and something in him
for the first time in longer than he could remember, went still. What she said next would take something from him that no court, no enemy, and no betrayal had ever managed to touch.
She didn't ask him what he did for a living. She asked him something harder. When's the last time somebody needed you? Not your money, not your power, not what you could do for them. Just you, the actual person. He opened his mouth, closed it. I don't know if that person exists anymore. That's the saddest thing I've heard all week. And I live under a highway. He almost smiled. It surprised him enough that he noticed it. She told him about Carol, about the distance, about how she used to call every Sunday and now calls on holidays, and sometimes not even then. She said it without bitterness, just with the kind of honesty that comes from having had a long time to sit with something. I used to think I was strong because I carried everything myself, didn't ask for help, didn't show the hard parts, just kept going. She paused. You know what I was actually doing? What? I was making myself impossible to reach. Strength that keeps everyone out isn't strength, it's armor. And armor is heavy, James. It'll wear you down before any enemy does. He looked at her for a long time. My mother used to say something like that. Smart woman. She still with you? No. She passed a few years ago. She know what you do? Yes. She say anything about it? She said she didn't cross an ocean for me to become something people are afraid of. Lisa nodded slowly. She didn't say, I'm sorry. She didn't say, that's heavy. She just nodded, like it was exactly what a mother would say, like it deserved to be heard and not immediately covered over with comfort. You listening to her now? I'm here, aren't I? She almost smiled at that. The fire shifted. A burst of heat moved through the air between them, and then she leaned back slightly and looked at the overpass above them. You see this bridge? He looked up. Thousands of cars cross it every single day. Not one of them thinks about what's holding it up. They just use it, get where they need to go, and everybody underneath it, like me, gets the noise and the cold and the exhaust. He was quiet. You built yourself into a bridge, James. Everybody uses you. Nobody holds you up. And you've been so busy keeping everybody moving, you forgot to ask yourself if you even want to be a bridge. The city hummed above them. What do you want to be? Not what you have to be. Not what you built. What do you want to be? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And for a man who had an answer for everything, who walked into rooms full of dangerous people and spoken without flinching, that silence was the most honest thing he had produced in 20 years. She let it sit. She didn't rescue him from it. She waited. James, I want to be someone my mother would recognize. His voice came out differently than he expected. Quieter, like it had walked up from somewhere deep. Lisa, then you already know what you have to do. James, it'll cost me everything. Lisa, baby, you've already been paying everything. You've just been paying it to the wrong things. He exhaled, long, slow, shaking, the kind of exhale that carries years in it. He didn't sob, he didn't collapse. He just set something down. You could almost see it happen, some weight leaving his shoulders, releasing, like a coat he'd been wearing so long he forgot it wasn't skin. They sat in silence for a while after that. The fire crackled. The highway above them moved without rest. And then James said something quietly, almost to himself. How do you do it? How do you sit here with nothing and still see that clearly? Lisa, because I lost everything that was blurring my vision. Sometimes losing it all is the only way to see what was always true. She reached into her jacket, pulled out a worn Bible. She didn't open it, just held it in her lap. Lisa, I write things down in here, things people tell me, things I want to remember, things I'm waiting to understand. She looked at him. Somebody told me something once, a young woman, sweet girl, scared. She was a patient of mine. She said if anything happened to her, I should remember a name, 14 Kestrel. I wrote it down. I still don't know what it means, but I wrote it down. James went very still. He had heard that name before, in a file,
in a world he never talked about, in a context that made his stomach drop. He looked at her. She wasn't performing. She didn't know. She was just an old woman who wrote things in a Bible because somebody had asked her to remember. James. What was her name? The patient. Lisa. Patricia. Young thing. Nervous eyes. Good heart. She disappeared not long after I saw her. She touched the Bible gently. I still pray for her. The fire popped. A car crossed the bridge above them. James sat very still, the world reorganizing itself around him. He had come to this overpass to fall apart. He had not expected to find the peace that would rebuild everything. Sitting in a woman's Bible, handwritten in the dark.
James got back to his penthouse at 4:17 in the morning. He didn't sleep. He sat in his chair by the window and watched the city that had made him, the city he had bent to his will. And he thought about bridges. Who holds you up? By 6 a.m., he had written 3 pages of notes. By 7, he had made a decision that would have seemed impossible to anyone who knew him. He called his assistant. James, I need to meet with the federal investigators, not through lawyers, directly. Tell them I'm coming in voluntarily. His assistant's silence lasted long enough that James checked whether the call had dropped. James, did you hear me? I heard you. Are you sure? Set it up. What James was walking into would cost him his business, his freedom for a period of time, and every structure he had spent 20 years constructing. He knew that going in. He went anyway. He walked into the federal building alone. No attorneys, no representation. Just himself and the notes he had written before dawn. The 2 agents in that room, Agent Carver and Agent Morris, had spent 2 years building this case. They had been fed a version of events by Raymond, a clean story. James, the architect, Raymond, the reluctant witness. What James handed them that morning was the truth underneath the story. Agent Carver. Mr. Kwon, I have to ask, where's your representation? I don't want representation. I want to talk. Agent Morris. Sir, you understand anything you say. I understand what I'm waiving. He talked for 4 hours. Account numbers, offshore structures, deeds, names behind names. He gave them things Raymond had never mentioned because Raymond had not wanted them to look there. The agents grew quieter as he talked, not because they were satisfied, but because the picture was shifting. The architecture of the case was rearranging itself in real time. These accounts, they're not in your name. No, they're in Raymond's. The ones I was supposed to own are the ones he gave you. The ones he kept are the ones that matter. Raymond was feeding you a map to my door while his door stayed closed. A long silence. Agent Carver, why are you telling us this? Because I'm tired, and because someone reminded me last night that keeping everyone moving isn't the same as free. They looked at each other. Neither of them had any idea what that meant, but they kept listening. And then James put a document on the table, a printed email, 6 years old, sent from a woman named Patricia 3 days before she disappeared. The senior agent read it. Then he stood up and left the room without a word. What Patricia had written in that email, what she had discovered, what she had tried to warn James about, was about to pull the entire case inside out. Patricia had been Raymond's accountant. She was 29 years old when she found the discrepancy. $47 million in an offshore account that had no legitimate origin story, no paper trail connecting it to any of the businesses James controlled. She had done what honest people do when they find something that frightens them. She documented it. She secured a copy. And she sent an email to James Kwon, the only person above Raymond she had access to. James had not read that email for 3 days. By the time he opened it, Patricia was gone. Raymond had moved fast. He always did. Patricia's case had been listed as a missing person, cold within 18 months. Most people had forgotten. James had not. He had kept that email for 6 years, not as evidence, not as strategy, but because some part of him refused to let her simply vanish. While the investigation accelerated through that week, a junior agent ran a routine background search on the homeless camp James had visited. He was thorough. He cross-referenced names. And there, in a 6-year-old hospital nursing record, was the name Lisa. Agent Morris. She was Patricia's nurse, 3 weeks before Patricia disappeared. The room went very quiet. They brought Lisa in for a voluntary interview. She came without hesitation. She brought her Bible. Lisa. She was scared, that girl. She didn't say much, but her hands gave her away. Nurses notice hands. Before she left, she told me, if anything happens to me, remember 14 Kestrel. I didn't understand it. I just wrote it down. She opened the Bible. Near the back, a small folded piece of paper, soft from being handled, with 2 words and a number written in pen. 14 Kestrel. Raymond's offshore account. $47 million. The account that hadn't existed anywhere in the investigation until that moment. The agent across from Lisa looked at that piece of paper for a long time. Agent Morris. Ma'am, do you understand what this is? Lisa. I understand that girl asked me to remember it, and I did. She had been carrying the key to a federal case for 6 years, under an overpass, in a Bible worn soft from use, with no idea what it unlocked, until a man in a tailored suit sat down beside her in the cold. And here is the thing that will stay with you long after this story ends. Lisa didn't find James. James didn't find Lisa. Something else moved in that direction. Call it what you will. But 2 lives, separated by a world of difference, carrying pieces of the same broken thing, they found each other on a concrete floor in the dark. And the truth came up from both of them at once. Raymond was arrested on a Tuesday at 6:14 in the morning. He was at his home. He was wearing a robe. His lawyers arrived 41 minutes later. It didn't change what was coming. The charges were read slowly: wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, conspiracy to conceal assets, and then the one that changed the temperature in the room: conspiracy in the disappearance of Patricia. They had enough. The email, the account, the timeline, the transfers that moved in the 48 hours after Patricia's last contact, the paper trail Raymond had been so careful to bury, and had buried just far enough that it took a Bible and an old woman's faithfulness to finally surface. He was led out of his home in handcuffs. He looked for familiar faces. He found none. As the federal vehicle pulled away, he saw James standing across the street, just watching. Raymond, this isn't over, James. James didn't respond. He looked at Raymond the way a man looks at something he built badly,
and finally had the courage to take apart. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something quieter than either. His hands, for the first time in memory, were open, not clenched. He turned and walked back towards his car, and then he stopped, stood still for a moment on the sidewalk, breathed, because what came next was the hardest part. Not the legal battle, not the surrender, the undoing, the careful, deliberate process of dismantling something you built with your whole life because you finally admitted it was wrong.
He began the dismantling on a Thursday, piece by piece, business by business, quietly, without announcement. Some assets went to legitimate partners who had always operated above the line. Some were surrendered as part of his cooperation agreement. A significant amount, more than anyone expected, went into a foundation he established before his legal proceedings were resolved. Not a tax strategy, a foundation, with a board, with accountability, with a specific focus on housing assistance and nursing scholarships. He named it after his mother. He served 14 months. His cooperation and voluntary disclosure reduced what could have been a decade. He used the time the way people who have been moving too fast always use stillness, to understand what they had been avoiding. He came out quieter, leaner, clearer in the eyes, and on the morning of his release, he stood outside the facility in the gray early light and waited. He had asked his team to make one call, not to arrange a car, not to schedule a meeting. He had asked them to call Lisa. He didn't know if she would come. He hadn't spoken to her since that night. He had no right to assume she owed him anything. He had asked anyway, because hope is the thing you reach for when you've run out of strategy. He stood on the pavement for 11 minutes, and then she walked around the corner. Different coat, clean shoes, same eyes, steady and clear, and seeing straight through whatever he was wearing on his face. He walked toward her slowly, stopped a few feet away. "James, I didn't know if you'd come." "Lisa, I came, didn't I?" He looked at her for a long moment. There was shame in that look, the real kind, not the performed kind. Shame for what he'd been, fear that she'd see it, and something underneath both of those things that was closer to gratitude than he had words for. He reached into his jacket. "Lisa, James, if you're about to give me money..." "James, it's not money." He handed her an envelope. She opened it slowly, read it twice. The deed to a small house, a real one, a yard, a garden space. Her name at the top of every line. "I can't accept this. James, you told me to stop being a bridge and start figuring out what I actually want to be." "Lisa, I remember." "James, I want to be someone who pays his real debts, not the ones that keep people afraid of him, the ones that actually matter." She folded the paper carefully, held it to her chest, closed her eyes. She didn't cry. He didn't either. They just stood there in the gray morning air, two people from completely different worlds, carrying pieces of the same wound, having somehow helped each other find what was missing. There was nothing tidy about it, nothing fully resolved, but there was something real. And sometimes, real is the only miracle you get. I want to talk to you for a moment. Not about James, not about Lisa. About what this story is actually about. Power without wisdom is just expensive loneliness. James had every material advantage a person can accumulate. And he was so hollowed out by the time he walked under that overpass that he asked a stranger for the kind of conversation most of us take for granted. There is a version of that story in almost every life. Not at his scale, but the shape of it, the busyness that replaces connection, the armor that replaces honesty, the keeping it together that becomes a way of keeping everyone at a distance. That shape is familiar to more people than we admit. Lisa had lost everything by the world's measure. Her home, her savings, her marriage, the closeness with her daughter. And what she had left was something that cannot be taken: clarity. The ability to see people honestly. The willingness to speak truth without needing anything back for it. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinarily rare thing. And James, for all his danger, for all the harm he enabled, had one moment of genuine courage. He crouched down. He asked an honest question. He listened to the answer instead of calculating how to use it. That one act of humility started a chain that brought down a murderer, surfaced the truth about Patricia, and rebuilt a life that had been quietly dying behind its own wealth. So here is what I want to leave with you. Who in your life is telling you the truth that you keep finding reasons not to hear? You carrying that you've been calling strength, but is actually just weight? And what would you become? What could you become if you finally set it down? Because the wisest voice in the room is rarely the loudest one. Sometimes it is sitting quietly in the cold, waiting, with more patience than you deserve, until you are finally ready to listen. If this story reached you, if even one moment in it felt true, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below. Tell me which line stayed with you. Tell me which moment hit differently. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. And if you know someone who is carrying too much right now, someone who has been strong for so long they've forgotten what it costs, share this with them. You don't need a caption. They'll understand why you sent it. If this gave you something today, like the video. It genuinely helps more people find it. And subscribe, because the next story we're telling involves a decision made in 60 seconds that changed 3 families forever. You will not see the ending coming. I'll see you there. Take care of yourselves, and take care of each other.